Okay, this is the intro to the recording for the Friday night Bible study for the 9th day of April 2021. We'll give the Hebrew date once we're live. We'll be streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and our own cogtv.org webpage as soon as we get the green lights. Here we go. All right, we're happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom. We're planning on coming on a little bit early tonight. However, I can't find our stream anywhere. Let me see. So I may just have to tell you we're coming on early. And let's see, are we there? Oh, wait a second. It looks like we're on our cogtv.org page because we're coming through with a little goodie there. Let me come a little closer. Oops, well, what happened here? I meant to come closer like this right here. Okay, now, we're coming on early because we got a big thunderstorm coming this way, according to the weatherman. And we're trying a new service. And it doesn't look like we're coming through. Okay, so I tell you what, if you do get this, just be aware we're trying to get on early tonight because of that thunderstorm. So I'm going to check our settings. Oh, wait a second, I'm seeing an indication. And now I'm hearing it. Okay, this is good. I think I'll just stay with us. Because we're coming through on, what is this? This is YouTube. Okay. We're coming through on YouTube Live. Okay, we're wrong. All right, and it looks like we're also coming through. I need to turn down this volume. Oh, no, wait, that's playing...
Shabbat Shalom, and these four are being look like we're so coming late in the day today. But with that...
Bear with me just a moment. I'm trying to see whether we're live. It looks like...
Tighter. And again, wish you all a wonderful last day of unleavened bread. Just be aware we're
okay, so
early tonight because of that thunderstorm. So
let me stop that one. I got two playing at once here from the cogtv.org website. I've got the YouTube archive playing, and then the it looks like the live stream is coming through. Okay. It was just a little delay, so fake me off a little bit there, and then if we can see, are we coming through on Facebook Live? Yeah. Which one of these has got...
Just a moment. I'm trying to see what...
Which one of these has got the volume coming through? Okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry for the confusion tonight, but we're trying to get on early. We're trying out a new service that lets us multi-stream, simulcast on 3 channels at the same time, on Facebook, on our Sabbath service page, on YouTube on our Sabbath service channel, and because of high-tech censoring that we've seen during the last year, we're trying to make sure we always go on our own homepage at cogtv.org. And we are there tonight. I see us on YouTube. I think we're on Facebook. You know, one thing I liked about the way we used to be able to do it, I could see the lights on our streaming software. But now I'm depending on an outside external source because that stopped working. And
our Sabbath service page on YouTube.
Okay, and so I have to turn on three different smartphones and check each source, and it looks like we're there. So thank you for the forbearance. We're going to get right into Mr. Armstrong tonight, God's end-time apostle, where we are in the series that we're playing from 1983. Mr. Armstrong has just taken a very important trip to the Far East. And he asked at the introduction of the telecast that we're playing, he makes a statement, asks the question about why has God opened all these doors to me? And brethren, to you and to me, the answer to that question should be obvious. If he doesn't answer it during the telecast, we'll talk about it later. I want to get into him right after we mention where we are date-wise. On the calendar, let's bring that full forward here. We are, get this lower third out of our way, we are at the 10th day of April. Did I mention, let's bring that lower third back up for a moment. We're at the, put it where we can see the date. We're at the 28th day of the first month on God's holy sacred calendar. There's 30 days in the first month, so there's 2 more days of this month to go. And then we start the countdown in the second month of the year toward the second Passover. Now, that's not for everybody to do a second Passover. That's there because the Passover is not only the most solemn feast of the entire year, it is a most important feast to God that, brethren, all of us who are called, keep it. Very important. And if you missed it and had a good reason for missing it, then God provides a makeup. That's the only good makeup that I know of that God provides. A makeup for missing the first Passover. He has the second Passover on the 14th of the second month. And this year, that'll be 2 weeks from tomorrow. Now, when I say tomorrow, I don't mean on the Roman calendar, because if you're looking at the Roman calendar, till midnight tonight, it's Friday. But as of sunset where you are, it became the Sabbath, and so the day after the Sabbath is the first day of the week, or as they call it on the Roman calendar, Sunday. 2 weeks from this Sunday, after sunset, on that Sunday, which would be April 25. Let's bring this calendar back up, see where we are now that we're making headway as to what we're talking about, where we are. Here's the calendar for the whole year. Let's come in a little tighter on April and May. I've cut May and slid it up under April because this way you can see where we're counting to right now. We are at the end, or toward the end, and we'll be at the end tomorrow night. It's already the Sabbath. So at the end of the Sabbath, at sundown this Sabbath, not sundown Friday night, but sundown Saturday night, we will be at the end of the second week of 7 weeks of counting toward Pentecost. And as you see on the calendar, I've got the date for this Sabbath. You know, after midnight on the Roman calendar, it'll be the 10th. And so this Sabbath is the 10th day of April. At the end of the Sabbath, we are at the end of 2 weeks of a 7-week count. And if you go ahead and count down to the end of the 7th week, that puts you where I've got the next yellow circle date of May 15. And then the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, that's when we do the Holy Day offering. When we do the Holy Day, that's when we do the offering, and that's when we celebrate Pentecost. And I'm emphasizing that fact because of what Leviticus 23 verse 16 says, and the morrow after the seventh Sabbath, you do the offering, which means you keep the holy day that day. And some are trying to say, oh, no, you've got to wait till 50 days are complete. That's not what the verse in verse 15 of Leviticus 23 says. It says 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. So if you count it out, we can't see the 1, 2, 3, 4 first 4 days of the first week because they're in the month of March. They're the last 4 days of March. That'd be 31, 30, 29, 28. The 28th through the 31st would be where you see the gray area in the top row of April. And the 28th of March was the wave sheaf day, and that was day number 1 on the 50-day count. So day number 7 was April 3rd, last Sabbath. Day number 14 is today, this Sabbath, which we're going to relate to as April 10 because, after midnight it'd be the 10th. And this Sabbath, at the end of this Sabbath, the end of 2 weeks, the end of 14 days, you carry that through at the end of the 7th week, at the end of May 15, we'll have had 7 Sabbaths complete. That's all Leviticus 23 verse 15 says. Now, the people who are promoting, we've got to continue to keep a Monday Pentecost, the people who are saying that will tell you that you can't depend on Scripture on one side of their mouth, and on the other side of the mouth, they're saying, the only verse in the Bible that tells you how to count it is Leviticus 23, verses 15 and 16, folks, also. But then they turn to Acts 2, verse 1, and because they say you can't trust the text of the Bible that we have, the translations we have, they turn to a very corrupted version of the Bible created by Thomas Cranmer in 1539, who was the Archbishop of the Church of England in Canterbury. Now, Queen Mary I had his head cut off because Queen Mary was strictly a Catholic. And Thomas Cranmer was of the Protestant movement. Now, just because the Protestant movement recognized that things they felt the Catholic Church was doing wrong, that doesn't mean the Protestants had it perfect. They continued, as Cardinal Gibbons 100 years ago in New York, when he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, he lambasted the Protestants and said, you guys think you got it straight and that you pointing the finger at us that we're wrong. And then he said, you're keeping the day we made as the day of the Lord, the day of worship of the Lord. They said, and the Cardinal Gibbons said, you can check your Bible from Genesis to Revelation and you will not find one verse that sanctions worship on Sunday. He said, if you're using the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, you're going to find that the day of worship is Saturday, the 7th day. This is Cardinal Gibbons, Catholic, saying that. And then he goes on to say, you people who are keeping Sunday are our daughters. You're keeping that day because of us. We're the ones who established that as a day of worship in the 4th century with the Council of Laodicea, the Council of Nicaea, and then one of the Roman emperors, Constantine, gets in on the act and says, oh, this is great. Well, we're going to make this Roman law, and we're going to sanction it, and we're going to bring pagan traditions into it and label it all as Christian. And anybody who Judaizes are going to be labeled as anathema to God. So the Protestants didn't dare turn to Sabbath because the Roman government would have put them to death. But they protested the Roman Catholic Church, and yet they continued to kind of waltz along with them by worshiping on the day of Baal, so. All right, so long story short, where are we here with this? Okay, so these people that want to continue, excuse me, sorry about that. These people who want to continue to observe Pentecost on Monday out of our old tradition, claiming that that was original revealed knowledge. Well, friends, if that was original revealed knowledge, then why was God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong observing Pentecost on the 6th day of the 3rd month for his first 13 years? 7 years alone with Mrs. Armstrong, and then 6 years with the 19 early first members of the Philadelphia era of God's church. So those 7 years plus 6 years, the first 13 years from the springtime of 1927, when Mr. Armstrong, with his wife, Loma, first kept Pentecost, and they kept it again on the 6th day of the 3rd month, just like the Jewish people do. The Karaite Jewish people, the Pharisaical Jewish people, were counting from the annual Sabbath of the first day of unleavened bread, and it always comes out on the 6th day of the 3rd month when you count it from the annual Sabbath, instead of counting it correctly as God corrected us to do in 1940, to count it from the weekly Sabbath. Well, when God made that first correction, and by the way, that year, for those of you who are claiming we got to go back and keep original revealed knowledge, well, if you're going to stay true to the way you claim original revealed knowledge came, you'd be keeping Pentecost on the 6th day of the 3rd month each year, the same way the Pharisaical, Karaite Jewish people keep it. Still today. The Jewish people didn't go along with the correction God made in 1940, and that year, I was going to say, by the way, that year, Pentecost had been scheduled for the Church of God, the Philadelphia era of the Church of God, then called the Radio Church of God. Pentecost had been scheduled for the 6th day of the 3rd month that year. But just a few days, give or take, maybe a week or two, just shortly before Pentecost, Mr. Armstrong sent out an urgent letter saying, whoa, hold it, folks, we're going to be keeping Pentecost not on the 6th day of the 3rd month this year, but we're going to be keeping it on, let's see, what year was that? Did I say 1940? In 1940, with the help here of Arthur Spear and the Comprehensive Hebrew Calendar, looking up 1940, we see that the 6th day of the 3rd month that year would have been the first day of June. So where Mr. Armstrong had, I'm in the wrong year, I'm sorry, that's 1941. All right, let's go to 1940. 3rd month, the 6th day of the 3rd month in 1940 was, on the Roman calendar, the 12th day of June. So where Mr. Armstrong, you check the old diaries and the old articles and letters of Mr. Armstrong, you'll see that he had Pentecost scheduled for the 12th day of June. That is the equivalent, according to Spear here, of the 6th day of the 3rd month. So he was keeping it, continuing to keep it. That would have been 14 years of keeping Pentecost on the 14th day of the 3rd month, except that year, God chose to correct Mr. Armstrong and reveal to him that we should be counting Pentecost from the weekly Sabbath, going back to verses 11 of Leviticus 23, and with just other understanding God gave Mr. Armstrong that year. So Mr. Armstrong pulled a screeching halt to observing Pentecost on the 6th day of the 3rd month that year, from observing it on the 12th day of June, and he counted it not from the weekly Sabbath, but from the wave sheaf day, the day after the weekly Sabbath. That year, Passover, the 14th of the 1st month, was the 22nd day of April. And the Sabbath that year was the 27th. So I said the 22nd, the day after 21, 22, the 22nd day of that month that year, in April that year, April 22nd, was Passover. The weekly Sabbath during that week would have been April 27. So instead of counting from that Sabbath, he counted from the morrow after that Sabbath. And instead of counting beginning with it, he counted with English grammar from April 28. And where it should have been, it's easy to figure. If you figure that Sabbath as target Sabbath 0, go to the next Sabbath and just count ahead 7 weeks. So that would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The end of the seventh Sabbath, from the Sabbath during Passover days and days of unleavened bread, the end of the seventh Sabbath would come out on the 9th day of the 3rd month that year. So Mr. Armstrong moved the Passover, the Pentecost. Mr. Armstrong moved Pentecost from the 12th day of June, which again is the equivalent of the 6th day of the 3rd month. He moved it to the 17th of June, which counts out 50 days from the wave sheaf day. And so God gave us a correction, but Mr. Armstrong didn't fully understand the correction because of the English translations of the Bible. And God let that part of it go. Once we understood we should be counting from the weekly Sabbath, then Mr. Armstrong gave notice. All right, we're counting, but looking at Leviticus 23, verse 15, it says count from the morrow after that Sabbath. And it's got the word from in there, which shouldn't be there. As some of you know, it should be beginning with, according to Hebrew scholars and according to the Hebrew grammar for Min Shabbat, the original Hebrew words. Some of you, even the Oregon people do understand that, and they say, see, it should be inclusive. See, they went along with part of the correction, where Mr. Armstrong changed from counting from the annual Sabbath to counting from the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. Okay, so we didn't get that fully correct, but at least we were targeting with the weekly Sabbath instead of the annual Sabbath. So we got that part of the correction. Well, those who continue to keep Pentecost, they never hollered that we got the verbiage wrong until God corrected us in 1974 to understand that we not only count from the weekly Sabbath, but we truly count from the weekly Sabbath, not from the wave sheaf day. We count from the weekly Sabbath, beginning with the morrow after the weekly Sabbath. Okay, I know that's highly technical, but you need to be. When God puts it a certain way, we need to follow it that way. And when God corrects us, when we've got it incorrect, we prove to God that we won't stick with our wrong tradition. We'll change when we are corrected. Well, some of us will, some won't. Some say, oh no, that was original revealed knowledge. And then they don't tell you the whole truth, nothing but the truth. The real truth is, if we were going from what God first caused Mr. Armstrong to understand, that being revealed knowledge, well, Mr. Armstrong was keeping Pentecost with the Jewish people, counting it from the annual Sabbath. So if we're going to go back to what was originally, quote unquote, revealed, and from what they say, people need to be going back to the 6th day of the 3rd month, counting it from the annual Sabbath. But you already understand, no, that's not what God's doing. But you want to confuse people, so you throw a bunch of smoke, dust in the air, and create a smoke screen. You need to watch out, because the people are aggressive, brethren. Those people are aggressive. You know, I called for a friend one day, and the friend's sister answered the phone and knew me from college days and said, Stephen, you ought to be keeping Pentecost on Monday. I'm like, all right, first of all, I didn't call to talk to you. I called to talk to my friend, who happens to be your sister. And I didn't call to argue this either. But since you brought it up, I was keeping Sunday Pentecost my freshman year when I saw it in the Bible. And, well, I could go into that whole conversation, but listen, I want to get us to Mr. Armstrong. There's something special I want us to do tonight. We're going to be, as we got 7 weeks, we have 5 weeks left to go in our count toward Pentecost. So we're going to be talking about the details for counting Pentecost. And brethren, we're going to make sure we all got it straight. If some of you think I've got it wrong in any way at all, as long as your attitude is good about it, I'll listen to your argument. But if you don't have your argument straight, I guarantee you I'll shoot it down real quick, because I'll just tell you what I was about to tell you. In 1971, in the spring of 1971, when Mr. Armstrong was sitting up on the podium behind the lectern, telling us about counting to Pentecost and reading Leviticus 23 verses 15 and 16, I'm sitting there after just having had a foreign language class that day with Mr. DeBar Party, and explaining very carefully to us the transliteration rules for translating from a source language to a target language. And you have to consider both languages and the grammar in both languages and the grammar rules of both languages to get transliteration correct. And it had been explained that if there's a word in the original language, the source language, that you're translating into a target language where you need an idiomatic expression made, you can't use the word you want to use in the source language if there's a word in, I should have said in the target language. You can't use an idiomatic word if in the source language the word you want to use exists but was not used, and instead a different word was used. The words I'm referring to are Shabbat and Shabuah, the word for weeks in Hebrew. There's a word for weeks, and there's a word for the Sabbath day, the Shabbat, min Shabbat, the Sabbath. And the Hebrew grammar means you work inclusive with it when you're referring to account with it. And God used the word Shabbat. So when he says in Leviticus 23:15 that we count from the morrow after the seventh Shabbat, he's not saying at the end of a week that can be moved around from any section of days, for example, Sunday through Monday. Monday through Sunday, so that the week ends at sunset at the end of Sunday. When he says Shabbat, the week's got to end with the Sabbath day. And the morrow after the seventh Shabbat, after the seventh Sabbath day, has got to be after the word he used, Shabbat, seventh day. And I saw that as a freshman, and having the transliteration rules firmly in mind, and also the syntax of verses 15 and 16. If the wave sheaf day is the morrow after a min Shabbat, then the morrow after the seventh min Shabbat's also got to be the same day of the week. So I'm sitting there in my chair saying, well, verse 16 is telling us we've got something wrong with our understanding from verse 15. But, I'm just a dumb freshman then. I didn't know how to figure it out. I went back to the dorm, saw that my, what did we call him then? The person in charge of the dorm was a monitor, our dorm monitor, who was a senior. They do upperclassmen for the dorm monitor, which is the right way to do it. He was back already. Nobody else was back yet. Everybody else went straight to the student center, to have the meal coming up. I think our forum had been from 4 to 5, and so, dinner time. Everybody's heading for dinner. But Russ was there, our dorm monitor, and I said, hey, Russ, would you help me understand something? I'm having a problem. It looks like to me we ought to be keeping Pentecost on the same day we keep the wave sheaf day, on the first day of the week. And boy, the look on Russ's face was like very serious. It wasn't like, oh, you just got that wrong. No, he set me down. He said, well, look, Stephen, an evangelist went to Mr. Armstrong about that in 1950, 20 years ago, or it should have been 1951. And he couldn't convince Mr. Armstrong, and he said, I want to graduate. He just cut to the chase, saying, I want to graduate. He's saying, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to tell him what you said. And for which I was thinking, oh, good, don't get me in trouble here. If you want to graduate and you've gone through most of your time here, and I'm a freshman on probation, I don't want to get kicked out over this. But I also wanted to understand, well, how am I not understanding that. Why does this verse look like it ought to have it on the first day of the week? Anyway, I explained this to the gal on the phone. And that because it looked like to me it ought to be on first day of the week, I kept it on the first day of the week, and without making any waves about it, I just kept it privately myself. I also kept it on Monday for the next 3 years until God corrected us through our leader, Mr. Armstrong. I kept it with everybody else on Monday and kept my mouth shut about it, but except to God. I was praying my heart out to God, saying, God, if I've got this wrong, help me see and understand how and why I'm misunderstanding the plain language in that book, your Bible. Or if something's wrong there, please correct all of us from the top down. And was it music, even though it was painful to hear Mr. Armstrong eating crow, as it were, having to put ketchup on past words he had taught us about keeping Monday, his explanation of the reason why he had that wrong, because of the translation of verse 15 of Leviticus 23. The word from is not in the original Hebrew. Hebrew scholars said if you're going to put a preposition in there, it should be beginning with, because the Hebrew grammar tells you that count is inclusive. And all the other verses that relate to it tell you it's got to be inclusive. They understood that, even though they didn't understand, for whatever reason, because they were leaning toward the Pharisaical side, who opposed the Sadducees in it. The Sadducees had it right to count from the weekly Sabbath. But the Pharisees, who like to argue with the Sadducees, they wanted to count from the annual Sabbath. So that's a long argument that goes way back between the Sadducees and Pharisees. But when I tried to explain this to this gal who said, you ought to be keeping Pentecost on Monday, a gal who lives up in Oregon, by the way, when I saw that my explanation to her of how I understood it before God corrected us through Mr. Armstrong, I didn't make headway with her at all. She's still adamant. You should be keeping Pentecost on Monday. Like, look, I already understood before God corrected it, and I begged him to correct us all that it should be on Sunday. And boy, was I, why aren't you understanding this? Well, I'm hard-boiled and I ain't listening to nothing. I mean, she didn't say those words, but I mean, that's the bottom line of it, All right, brother, so Pentecost this year is right here. It's the morrow after the end of the 7th week. The 7th week ends on May 15, so the morrow after that at sunset on that Sabbath day, when it becomes, well, it won't become the 16th until after midnight if you're looking at the crazy Roman calendar, but after sunset on May 15 and through the day portion of May 16, it is Pentecost. And that year, it doesn't really matter where it falls on the Hebrew calendar, because it's going to move around, but it can only be, let me see if I've got this in our slide bank. While we're talking about this, let's go ahead and give you some good detail tonight on this. I think this will be even interesting to you people in France, who will be receiving later the French language reversion of this telecast. I'm doing something very special this week. We're going to try it and see if it works. We're going to sub in the French language audio over this whole telecast, including Mr. Armstrong speaking. We'll have a French voice come in and say what he's saying in the French language, because there are a lot of people in France still struggling to learn English, and some refuse to learn English. So, look, we're going to put it out there for you in English. I mean in French, in your language, French, and we're going to also eventually be doing the same thing with Tom Williams. I hope you're happy to hear this, in Spanish. And in respect and honor of Graham Davies, who died 4 weeks ago and who used to translate English to Portuguese for brethren in Brazil, so that would be South America, and in Angola and other parts of Africa, the continents I'm speaking of. And we'll try to also have a Portuguese reversion. So, even though we're small here and only a few people understand that we're scattered and that you really shouldn't be supporting these vanity plate groups. And brethren, yeah, comrade with brethren, but don't support groups that have created a vanity plate name. Now, no, that makes some ministers that I was in college with very upset with me when they hear me say that. But fellows, you need to fast and pray and ask God. Are you speaking through Stephen on that? Robert Collins says God told him while he was in the hospital with cancer he had needed to get rid of the vanity plate name. He followed God on that and was blessed with extra life. The cancer he had went totally into remission, to the surprise of many doctors who said he's only got 3 weeks to live. Well, God did a blessing to him, gave him longer. So, Pentecost will be May 16. And now here's a more important date, and then we'll get to Mr. Armstrong. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase myself. It's a little hot up here, and that's, if you get into a subject with somebody who's adamant about, we got to keep Pentecost on Monday, they can be fiery-eyed mean about it. And they're not joking around, and you shouldn't be joking around with them either. You should be calm, remain calm. You don't need to get excited. I mean, you're not going to change them by poking them in the face. Or in the mouth, you slug them in the mouth, it ain't going to change them. They probably just wind up either beating you up after that or suing you or, whatever, or you get arrested for assault and battery or something. But, and I didn't really mean literal smacking them in the teeth, but I mean, even if you do it verbally, if you don't stay calm and try to get agreements. And if you try to get agreements, you can find things you can agree on. And when you find enough things you agree on, the person may say, when you ask them a question about something you agree on, it just might be something God would use with his Spirit to turn around those who've simply been deceived about it. Now, those who get a paycheck from it or for some other reason of vanity don't want to change, even if the truth sneaks up and bites them on their heel, they may continue to argue against it just because they're so stubborn. And that is a sad shame if that happens. But you don't want to foster their stubbornness by taking the wrong, a hateful attitude with it. You want to hope in love that you're being able to answer the person will help them change where they're wrong about it. And sometimes that takes an awful lot of patience. And you've got to do it with sincerity, not too much joking, but maybe, humor always works good if it's fitting, if it fits right. And I didn't mean to say a more important date. That date is very important, actually. But the sooner date, a date that comes up sooner for those who missed the first Passover. I already mentioned it's 2 weeks from Sunday night. After sunset on Sunday, April 25, will be the second Passover this year. Let me cut in a little closer on this calendar. Let's see here. But first of all, you can see today we're April 10, April 25, just 2 weeks away from Sunday night. And let's see. Okay, that's as close as I got it. All right, I should have zoomed that in a little tighter, but we'll do that again. We got 2 more weeks to remind people. And brethren, if you know somebody who missed the first Passover, be loving to them and let them know, hey, Passover is very important. I'm not going to challenge you about why you missed, unless you're a close friend and just want to know and they'll tell you. But say, look, it's so important. It's the only feast day that God created a makeup day for. He has a backup for the Passover. It's the only one that you have that feast day twice. But you only do it the second time if you missed the first. If you kept the first, you don't come back and keep the second. But if you did miss the first, you definitely want to keep the second. And if you've got friends, and you should talk to your friends. Hey, how was your Passover? And if they say, oh, shoot, I forgot and missed it, or I was out of town and missed it, say, look, second Passover comes up the evening of April 25, Sunday night after sunset. Sunday night, April 25. Just 2 weeks from this Sunday. And we're going to be streaming that live in each time zone, just like we did Passover. So I used to do Second Passover with Roman Boric. We helped put it together. Neither of us were ordained then. We just hosted it and bring in a minister. And we had everything made ready for Second Passover. And there would always be at least 40 or 50 people who had missed the Passover who would be coming to keep the second Passover. And, you know, with 2,000 brethren at headquarters, 40, 50 is an understandable number. People who were either sick or out of town or whatever. Okay, so that comes up for those people on April 25. Mark that down, even if you kept it, in case you run into somebody who missed it. And you can tell them, hey, the 14th day of the second month is April 25, right after sunset this year. Begins right after sunset on April 25. That's the important time because that's the time when we would do the foot washing and the taking of the bread and the drinking of the wine. And we do it in the other order. Do the foot washing, drink the wine, then break the bread. Oh, no, I said that backward. All right. We'll do it correct that evening, okay? Let's go back to where I have Mr. Armstrong queued up and ready to go. And again, those of you listening in the French language, you're going to hear, it won't be the voice of Mr. Armstrong, it'll be a, what do you call those people? A translator speaking. And same thing for Spanish, a different translator, and for Portuguese. And we'll see how that goes. If some of you find that interesting, we'll try to keep that up. But from 1983, Mr. Armstrong is going to be speaking to us about his, and you'll see video of his trip to the Far East in this Far East Special 1983. He's going to open up, it's going to start right with his first word, boom. He's going to say doors, something about doors being open to him. Here's God's End Time Apostle from 1983, Herbert W. Armstrong.
Doors open to me for close personal contacts with heads of state all around the world. That is, with kings, with presidents, with prime ministers, emperors, and others high in office of national governments around the world. Now, just recently, I've returned from another Far Eastern trip when I visited 4 nations on this trip: the Philippines, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Japan. And I had personal contacts, once again, with heads of state. But I am a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, why should I have such contacts? What does that have to do with the gospel? Well, Jesus Christ is the one who brought the gospel, and he had contacts with the great and the near great of his day. He not only talked to the common people, he talked to all people. And he talked to the great and the near great in private conversation. He didn't say, "Give me your heart and let me save you." And neither do I. But what is the gospel? The word gospel means good news. Jesus was a newscaster. He came bringing news, and he brought good news, but it was not news that already had happened. The news you read in the newspapers and that you see on newscasts today is news that already has happened. You might call it olds instead of news because it's not new any longer, it's already happened. And it's nearly all bad news. The news of this world is bad. Jesus came bringing the news of another world, good news, and it was an announcement of a world to come. Now, this world is not God's world. Did you think it was? You better think again. This world is not God's world. Jesus came proclaiming the good news of a world that will be God's world. A world to come, and it will be God's world, And he came to start that world. Jesus didn't come to reform the world. He came to start another world. Adam started a world that has developed on the principle of get. And this whole society, it is not God's society. Governments, society, education, whatever you have, all of the institutions that make up this civilization and this modern society, this civilization, it is not God's civilization, it's not God's way. Jesus came to start a world that it will be God's way. As this world was started through the one man Adam, so the world to come was started with the one man Jesus Christ, often called the second Adam. The second Adam was the divine Adam, Jesus Christ in the human flesh. Jesus was born to be a king, but not of this world, the king of the world to come, that will be God's world, a world to come. And he taught his disciples that way of life. He called them out of this world, to be separate from this world, in the sense that they would live as the first Adam should have lived, but didn't. To live in the way that the second Adam, Jesus Christ, did live. Now, he talked to the great and the near great, as I said. And he sent his disciples when they became apostles, after he had taught them for 3.5 years, he sent them out on the Great Commission to do two things. To give them the good news of the world that is coming. Now, that's just an announcement. To give that announcement of what is coming. Not necessarily to convert them, because Jesus said, and most of you have never known this, it's in John 6:44 in your Bible, John 6, verse 44. No man can come to me, Jesus said, except the Father which sent me draws him. Now the time is coming when everybody is going to be called, but that time has not come yet. Jesus went and said, teach this good news, teach this right way of living, and give this announcement of the good news of the world to come. That's what I do. I do the same thing that Christ came to do. I do the same thing he commissioned his apostles to do. And I am his apostle today. And I do go and teach the good news of the coming kingdom of God, God's world, a world of peace and happiness, when the whole world will blossom forth in peace and joy and happiness and great production and plenty and comfort and eternal life, which we do not have now. Now, the original apostles did go out proclaiming that way, and I do the same today.
On a recent 25,000-mile Asian-speaking tour, Mr. Armstrong visited heads of state and addressed Plain Truth subscribers in the Philippines, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Japan. First stop was Manila, capital city of the Philippines. Upon arrival at the Manila International Airport, Mr. Armstrong was welcomed by Regional Director Guy Ames and staff members from the Philippine office. An official police motorcycle escort was provided to lead Mr. Armstrong's party through the busy streets of Manila. After several private meetings with government officials, Mr. Armstrong was scheduled to speak at the Manila Midtown Hotel. Several thousand Plain Truth subscribers and Worldwide Church of God members had traveled from all parts of the Philippines to attend the lecture. A standing room only crowd filled the grand ballroom. Mr. Armstrong warned the audience of the severe crisis confronting all nations today, as they once again stand on the brink of world war.
General MacArthur delivered one of the great speeches of recent world history. He said, "Men since the beginning of time have sought peace. Various methods through the ages have been attempted. Military alliances, balances of power, leagues of nations, all have failed, leaving the only path to be by the way of the crucible of war. The utter destructiveness of war now blots out this alternative. We have had our last chance. Armageddon will be at the door. The problem, basically, is theological. It must be of the Spirit if we are to save the flesh. Those are the words of General MacArthur. And they never were more appropriate, they never were more true than they are at this minute. Now, several years have gone by. Conditions have worsened. They have not gotten better. The United Nations was going to bring us peace. World War II was the war that was to end wars. World War I was the war that was to end wars. None of them ever ended war. None of them ever will.
Mr. Armstrong showed that mankind does not know the way to peace. Then, through the pages of the Bible, he revealed how God would put an end to all wars and bring peace to the world at last.
It's time we wake up. It's time we get our eyes open. We have lost God. We have forgotten God. And God is going to step in. Satan is ruling this dark world, and it's an unhappy world. And Armageddon is going to be here in the end of the world, and Christ is coming as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And they shall see the Son of Man, or Jesus Christ, coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory and supreme authority to rule all nations and bring in the world tomorrow. That will be a world of peace at last.
From Manila, Mr. Armstrong flew to Bangkok, capital of the Kingdom of Thailand. He was met at Don Muang International Airport by Ambassador College representatives and several Thai dignitaries, including Abbot Pratap Sapon, president of the Wat Thai Buddhist Temple in Los Angeles and a leading religious figure in Thailand and the United States. Mr. Armstrong was again provided with an official police escort. Later that day, Mr. Armstrong was interviewed by representatives of the Thai press and a leading television station about Ambassador Foundation projects in Thailand and the work around the world.
We're interested in teaching the way of life and also the purpose of life. For example, why were we put here on earth? What are we human beings doing here? Why do we live in a world, for example, with such a paradox in which we have, in today's world, awesome progress, awesome accomplishment, and at the same time we have appalling evils. You've had appalling evils right here in Thailand. Now, we find that in this world, the guiding motive in life has been what I call get. And there was a great teacher who said it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Now, I learned that 56 years ago, and I've been practicing this way of giving ever since, instead of getting. And I find that it really pays. We're helping with projects in many nations.
Mr. Armstrong was driven to the office of the Prime Minister, where he was to receive an official decoration by Deputy Prime Minister Major General Brahman Adireksan on behalf of His Majesty King Bhumibol Adulyadej. Upon his arrival, he was officially received by the Deputy Prime Minister. Following their personal meeting, the formal presentation took place in the ceremonial room. Before a portrait of the king, flanked by the United States and Thai flags, The protocol officer read the citation.
คำประกาศเกียรติคุณ นาย Herbert W Armstrong ประมุขคริสตศาสนาลัทธิ Worldwide Church of God อธิการบดีมหาวิทยาลัย
Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, the Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God,
เป็นบุคคลผู้ทรงเกียรติ
Chairman and founder of Ambassador College
เป็นประโยชน์ให้แก่ประชาชน
and Ambassador Foundation,
ติดต่อกันมา
is a person of high distinction
ด้วยการยอมรับนับถือ
and has
ใน
rendered
การบำเพ็ญประโยชน์
most benevolent services
ของนาย
to the
Herbert
people
W.
and the government
Armstrong
of Thailand.
พระบาทสมเด็จพระเจ้าอยู่หัว
In recognition of these valuable services, His Majesty the King, at the recommendation of the Royal Thai government, has been pleased to bestow the most noble order of the Crown of Thailand upon Mr. Herbert Armstrong.
ขออวยพรให้นาย
May Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong
ประสบความสำ
be
เร็จ
blessed with every success,
และความเจริญรุ่งเรือง
happiness,
ทุกประการ
and
ใดไป
prosperity.
Mr. Armstrong was then presented with the official insignia of a commander of the most noble order of the Crown of Thailand and a commemorative plaque. He responded with a toast to His Majesty the King.
Now may I propose a toast to His Majesty the King, who has so faithfully and diligently pursued his commitment that he made in his coronation at 1950, where he said, "We shall reign with righteousness for the happiness and the welfare of the Thai people." He has loved his people and has served them admirably all these many years. I propose a toast to His Majesty.
The next day, Mr. Armstrong once again paid a personal visit to His Majesty King Bhumibol at the Royal Palace. During the visit, Mr. Armstrong discussed the Ambassador Foundation's ongoing participation in educational projects in Thailand. The following day, at a congratulatory luncheon at Bangkok's Montien Hotel, Mr. Armstrong received further recognition from his friends in Thailand. First, Police General Chumpan Lohachala presented a plaque on behalf of Abbot Pratep Sopon in appreciation of Mr. Armstrong's assistance to the Bangkok Bicentennial School. And secondly, an official from the Ministry of the Interior presented Mr. Armstrong with a plaque in recognition of Ambassador College's educational project to Indo-Chinese refugees in Thailand. Next stop on Mr. Armstrong's Asian itinerary was Hong Kong, the teeming manufacturing city and duty-free port on the edge of China. Here, he addressed a meeting of Plain Truth subscribers, reminding them why, in spite of great material progress, man cannot find the way to lasting peace.
But God has a government, and that government is a way of living. It's the way that God and the Word lived, and that is the way of outgoing love for one another and the way of cooperation and helping and serving. Each trying to help the other and to cooperate. And if you do that, you'll have peace. We don't live that way in the world. That's why we're having trouble.
From Hong Kong, Mr. Armstrong was asked to return to Manila for a special ceremony arranged by the Philippine government. The day after his arrival, he had a personal meeting with President Marcos. Mr. Armstrong has met with the president many times in the last 12 years. After the meeting, the president escorted Mr. Armstrong through the spacious receiving area into the red-carpeted ceremonial hall. President Ferdinand Marcos opened the ceremony by calling forward the honor guards carrying the national flags of both the United States and the Republic of the Philippines. As a United States citizen in a foreign country, Mr. Armstrong was moved by emotion when the band played the Star-Spangled Banner, as well as the national anthem of the Philippines. Following the playing of the anthems, the presidential citation was read by the acting Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Malacanang Palace, Manila. A Presidential Merit Medal is hereby conferred upon Dr. Herbert W. Armstrong, citation, for his consistent articulation of the positive values that invest a truly human existence, for his comprehensive education and media network he built to disseminate these values worldwide to reach every race and religion, for his generous contributions to the advancement of community programs that train the underprivileged for a life of productive self-reliance, for his moral presence and compelling influence in moving people toward the creation of a just and peaceful world order, for his kinship with the Filipino spirit and his keen understanding of the country's collective resolve to promote peace, justice, and progress, for his being a citizen of the world and thus belonging to every country, including the Philippines, whose national life he has enhanced in many meaningful ways. Now, therefore, I, Ferdinand E. Marcos, President of the Philippines, do hereby confer upon Dr. Herbert W. Armstrong, Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God, Editor-in-Chief of the Plain Truth magazine, Chancellor of Ambassador College, and Chairman of the Ambassador Foundation, the Presidential Merit Medal in testimony of the nation's appreciation of his personal efforts. Done in the city of Manila this 10th day of February in the Riero Road, 1983. Signed, Ferdinand E. Marcos, President of the Philippines.
President Marcos then decorated Mr. Armstrong with a Presidential Merit Medal and presented him with a parchment scroll of the citation. The Presidential Merit Medal is the highest award that President Marcos can confer upon a non-Filipino citizen. Following the ceremony, the President invited Mr. Armstrong to address the assembled dignitaries.
I would just like to say it's been a pleasure to have helped here in the Philippines for the last, I believe, 12 years now, and for the work that your president has done for his country, and for having had the opportunity to have helped somewhat in it, and also toward world peace, because I have been an ambassador without portfolio for world peace, and I hope we shall be able to have peace among all nations. I'm so glad to see here the stars and stripes with your national flag as a symbol of peace between our nations. Thank you so much.
At the conclusion of this prestigious ceremony, President Marcos requested all in attendance to join him in toasting Mr. Armstrong. Following the President's toast, Mr. Armstrong replied with a toast to the President and the First Lady. The last stop of Mr. Armstrong's Asian tour was Tokyo, a city of over 12 million that combines ancient tradition and the ultimate in modern technology. Since the end of World War II, the Japanese have become the superstars of the industrial world. Mr. Armstrong has been a frequent visitor to the Japanese capital. He has a long-standing friendship with Prince Mikasa, the brother of Emperor Hirohito, and several leading members of the Diet have called themselves his Japanese sons. Mr. Armstrong's first appointment was at the Middle Eastern Culture Center. Mr. Armstrong joined Prince Mikasa and Dr. Joseph Aviram, director of the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University, in presenting to the museum several artifacts from ancient Israel. The museum has an extensive library and a growing collection of artifacts from ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. Mr. Armstrong's mutual friendships with Japan and Israel have made it possible for him to assist the Prince in adding to the museum's collection several fine examples of ancient Israelite pottery. In appreciation, the Prince presented Mr. Armstrong with a commemorative plaque and conferred on him honorary membership to the Middle Eastern Culture Center.
Dr. Herbert W. Armstrong, distinguished educator, peacemaker, and philanthropist. By the action of the Board of Directors of the Middle Eastern Culture Center in Japan, and by the authority vested in me, I confer upon you the honorary membership of the library, and admit you to all the rights and privileges thereunto pertaining. Signed, Prince Takahito Mikasa, Honorary President.
During his visit to Tokyo, Mr. Armstrong was also invited to meet for the first time the new Japanese Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone at the Japanese Diet Building.
Well, good morning, Mr. Prime Minister. I have met all Prime Ministers now since Prime Minister Sato. So you will be the 7th Prime Minister I have met.
I am very honored to see you.
Very happy to meet you.
Mr. Armstrong follows the time-honored tradition of bringing a gift when visiting a head of state. He presented the Japanese Prime Minister with an example of fine American craftsmanship, a personally selected piece of Steuben crystal. He also presented Mr. Nakasone with the latest issue of the Plain Truth magazine, since the Prime Minister is featured on the cover. Mr. Nakasone showed interest in the magazine and personally autographed a copy for Mr. Armstrong. After the presentation, Mr. Armstrong discussed with the Prime Minister the current trade difficulties between the United States and Japan.
This is the same issue of the Plain Truth, the same copy that Prime Minister Nakasone himself looked through and autographed for me. You can see his autograph just as he gave it right here. He asked, should he write it in Japanese or American? And I said, just whichever language you usually sign it in. And that's the way he signed it. Now, this issue of the Plain Truth has an article about Japan. Japan, Asia's economic superpower, faces an uncertain future. And yet Japan is right now almost the dominant economic power in the world today. This article is, despite this recession, you can solve your financial worries. Here's another one, testing time for West Germany. What is going to happen over there? Just off the press now. Your awesome future, how religion deceives you. Until next time, Herbert W. Armstrong, goodbye, friends.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong, and thank you to those of you who are tuned in and watching tonight. God's end-time apostle speaking from 1983, visiting world leaders, fulfilling a prophecy that opens a way for the 5th seal to be opened by the great God at any moment. Because those first 4 seals that he tells us to watch, to be watching and to be praying, always praying without ceasing about the people affected by those first 4 seals, are blooming and blossoming. And as Jesus Christ warned us, instructed us, gave us warning that when those 4 seals happen, when they become full bloom, when they happen with great frequency and with great impact or intensity, then know, he said, just like you know summer is nigh when you see the little buds on a tree bloom out and blossom, he said, likewise know that the kingdom of God is near when you see these 4 seals happen, bloom out and blossom. And there is, now, how near is that kingdom of God then when those 4 seals have happened? Well, they're as near as the countdown clock that begins when the fifth seal, Great Tribulation, opens. A 3.5-year clock begins to the seventh, from the opening of that fifth seal to the blasting of that seventh trump of the seventh seal, when Jesus Christ returns. We'll talk more about that in future telecast. Brethren, we're kind of we're nearing the end of our time for Bible study, and I do want to cover just a few things as we close. People who could use some prayer. Greetings to Dane. I saw some of your interesting email. I didn't have a chance to respond yet, Dane, but I'm going to look at those further. Dane is the father of Jacob, who Dane is helping while he's having a seizure problem. And I see some notes about other people having that same problem. We should be praying for one another. Let's be praying for Jacob, that God will heal that fully for him. He'll know it, and then can get off the mind-dulling medications he's having to take because of it. And Dane, who fell a few weeks ago, let's continue to pray that his ribs will fully heal, and that I got to find out what happened, if the dentist got a tooth replacement in there for him. And then here's another person needing prayer. I saw Dan Listen on Thursday down in Tuscaloosa, and he still needs some prayer regarding having lost a lot of weight and muscle, and having a heart condition, which is, he's very thankful, and thank you for the prayers. He went from a heart that was only 5 or 6% operative. It's now over 35% and upwards to 45%. Needs to come up some more. He's still weak from a weak heart. So your prayers for Dan on that will be appreciated. A couple of people, we put a notice in the weekly bulletin for prayer after some trauma from a near collision automobile situation. I'll update as I get more information, and you can update too on the weekly bulletin here on Facebook Live. All right, brethren, and I'm not sure we're on live at the moment. I'll check it. If not, we'll rerun this again later on Facebook. I think we made it on YouTube, and I think we made it on our own cogtv.org homepage, where there's a window right under the banner that when we're live, you just need to press the speaker, open up the speaker button. You'll see the video, but you have to click it so that you take the X off the speaker so that it'll let the audio come through. And, all right, greetings to Tom Williams. Tom, I hope you're happy to hear that we will have this in a reversion in the Spanish language. And if you wonder how I'm doing that, this is not my voice if you're hearing it in Spanish, or in French, or in Portuguese, or later on, Paul Kiefer in German. All right, that's it for tonight. And we'll plan to be back in the morning, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:30 p.m. UK time for the Sabbath service, a.m. to the U.S., p.m. to the U.K. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the Sabbath tonight, good sleep, and God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll plan to see you after this thunderstorm tonight in the morning.